The relentless summer sun beat down on Hank Dawson's weathered face as he guided his horse through the narrow pass into Promise Valley. The weight of the pistol on his hip was familiar, but the weight in his chest, the memories he'd come to bury, that burden was far heavier than any gun could ever be. Arizona Territory, 1878. 3 years since the war that had claimed his brother. 3 years since he'd killed a man who didn't deserve to die. 3 years of running until he finally decided that some ghosts couldn't be outrun, they needed to be buried proper. Promise Valley hadn't changed much in the decade since he'd left. The same rolling hills, dotted with scrub brush and cacti, stretched toward mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The town itself was bigger, a proper street now instead of just a cluster of buildings. Progress, they called it. Hank wasn't so sure. He rode slowly down the main street, aware of the stares from the townspeople. Some faces he recognized, aged by the years. Others were new, drawn to the valley by the promise of silver in the hills or fertile land in the lowlands. His horse, a sturdy Appaloosa-named Traveler, seemed to sense his unease, nickering softly as they passed the general store. "Easy, boy," Hank murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We ain't staying long, just got business to attend to." The business was simple enough. His brother James was buried in a small cemetery just outside town. Hank had sent money for a proper headstone years ago, but had never seen it himself. Never said a proper goodbye. Some things a man couldn't do by letter or telegraph. He tied Traveler to the hitching post outside the saloon. A drink first to settle his nerves, then he'd find the cemetery. Then he'd be gone again by sundown. That was the plan. The saloon was cooler inside, shaded from the brutal sun. Several heads turned as he entered, but most returned to their drinks when they saw he was just another dusty traveler. Hank took a seat at the bar, ordering whiskey from a barkeep too young to remember him. "You passing through?" the bartender asked, sliding the glass across the polished wood. "Just here to pay respects," Hank replied, his voice roughened by trail dust and years of sparse conversation. "At the cemetery," the bartender nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lost someone in the war, my brother." Hank didn't elaborate, didn't mention that James had died because Hank hadn't been fast enough to save him. Didn't mention the revenge killing that had sent him running from this valley in the first place. He was halfway through his whiskey when the saloon doors swung open, bringing a shaft of sunlight and a woman with it. Not the usual sort you'd find in a saloon, no painted face or bright dress. She wore practical clothes, a simple skirt and blouse, hair the color of chestnuts pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She carried herself with purpose, walking straight to the bar. "Tom," she addressed the bartender, "I need that seed order. You said it would be in today." "It's in the back, Miss Juarez. Just arrived on the afternoon stage." The bartender Tom gestured toward a door behind him. "I'll fetch it for you." "Thank you," she replied, then glanced at Hank, meeting his gaze directly. Her eyes were a startling green against her sun-darkened skin. Hank nodded politely, then returned to his drink. None of his business what a lady was doing ordering seeds at a saloon instead of the general store. "You're new," she said, surprising him by taking the stool next to his. "Or rather, you're not from around here now, but you have been before." Hank raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that? The way you rode in, cautious but familiar, like you know the place but aren't sure of your welcome." She extended a hand. "I'm Valentina Juarez. I run the farm at the north end of the valley." Hank hesitated, then took her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work. "Hank Dawson," her eyes widened slightly. "Dawson, any relation to James Dawson?" The whiskey in Hank's stomach soured. "My brother." "I'm sorry," she said, and seemed to mean it. "He was a good man. He helped my father when we first came to the valley." Before Hank could respond, Tom returned with a small burlap sack. "Your tomato seeds, Miss Juarez," he said, handing them over. "And those special ones you ordered from back east. Cost a pretty penny, they did." "Worth every cent if they take to the soil here," she replied, slipping the bag into a pocket of her skirt. She turned back to Hank. "Mr. Dawson, if you're visiting your brother, you might want to know the cemetery's been moved. The old one flooded 3 springs ago." Hank frowned. "Moved?" "To higher ground by the old oak grove. I can show you if you like. It's on my way home." Hank wasn't in the habit of accepting help, especially not from strangers, but the idea of wandering around looking for a relocated cemetery didn't appeal either. Much obliged, Miss Juarez. Outside, Valentina untied a sturdy roan mare from the hitching post. She mounted with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. "This way," she said, guiding her horse north. Hank swung into his own saddle and followed. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a desert bird. The valley opened up around them, and Hank found himself studying it with new eyes. Green patches dotted the landscape where there'd once been only desert. "The valley's changed," he observed. "Irrigation," Valentina explained. "My father designed the system. He was an engineer before." She hesitated. "Before we had to leave Mexico." Hank nodded, understanding the unspoken story. The border was a place of shifting allegiances and fortunes. Many had crossed it seeking a new start, just as he had crossed many state lines seeking escape. "Your farm," he said, "is it just you, me and my father now?" "My mother passed 2 winters ago. We grow vegetables mostly, some fruit trees where the water reaches. The land's good if you know how to work it." She spoke of the land with such certainty, such belonging, that Hank felt a twinge of something he couldn't name. Envy, perhaps, or longing for roots he'd never allowed himself to put down. The cemetery came into view as they crested a small hill. It was a peaceful place, ringed by oak trees that must have been ancient even when the first settlers arrived. Simple wooden crosses and stone markers dotted the enclosed area. "I'll wait here," Valentina said, reining her horse to a stop at the gate. "Take your time." Hank dismounted, removing his hat as he entered the cemetery. It didn't take long to find James's grave. The headstone was simple but well crafted, bearing his name, the dates of his birth and death, and the words "beloved son and brother." Hank stood there, hat in hand, the words he'd come to say stuck in his throat. What could he say that would matter now? "Sorry I wasn't fast enough. Sorry I killed a man in your name. Sorry I ran. I should have been here sooner," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have been a lot of things, Jamie," he knelt, placing a hand on the sun-warmed stone. "I hope wherever you are you found peace. I'm still looking for mine." When he returned to where Valentina waited, the sun was beginning to set, painting the valley in hues of gold and amber. "Thank you," he said, mounting Traveler. "I appreciate the guidance." "Where are you headed now?" she asked as they rode back toward town, not sure. It was the truth. He'd planned to leave immediately after visiting the grave, but now that he was here, the urgency to flee had lessened. "Might stay a day or two, pay respects proper-like," Valentina nodded. As they approached a fork in the road, she gestured to the left path. "That's my way. Our farm's about a mile down that road." She hesitated, then added, "If you're staying, you're welcome to visit. We could use an extra hand with the irrigation work for a day or two, and we pay fair wages." Hank considered the offer. Work would be good. Keep his hands busy while his mind sorted through the memories this place stirred up. "I might take you up on that." "Good." She smiled, a quick flash of warmth that transformed her serious face. "Until tomorrow, perhaps, Mr. Dawson." "Hank," he corrected. "Just Hank." "Valentina," she returned, "or Val to friends." With that, she turned her mare toward home, leaving Hank to wonder when exactly he'd decided to stay, and why the prospect of seeing her again didn't feel like a burden. The room at the boarding house was small but clean, with a window that looked out over the main street. Hank sat on the edge of the bed, cleaning his revolver by the light of a kerosene lamp. Old habits died hard. The weapon was more a reminder than a necessity these days, but still, he kept it in working order. His mind drifted to Valentina Juarez. There was something about her that intrigued him, a steadiness, a certainty of purpose that he'd lost long ago. Or maybe never had. Morning came with the sounds of a town waking, wagons rolling down the street, shopkeepers opening their doors, children laughing as they raced to school. Hank ate a simple breakfast at the boarding house, then set off toward the Juarez farm. The farm was larger than he'd expected, with neat rows of crops stretching across what had once been barren land. A modest adobe house stood at the center, surrounded by a few outbuildings and an impressive irrigation system that channeled water from a distant stream. Valentina was in the fields when he arrived, examining plants with careful attention. She straightened as he approached, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "You came," she said, sounding pleased but not surprised. "Said I might," Hank replied. He gestured to the fields. "Impressive what you've done here." "It's taken years," she admitted, "and we still have much to do." She pointed to a section where the irrigation channels needed repair. "That's where we could use help. The spring floods damaged some of the channels." The work was hard but satisfying. Hank found himself enjoying the physical labor, the feel of earth and stone beneath his hands. Valentina worked alongside him, her strength and endurance matching his own. They spoke little, focused on the task, but the silence was comfortable. At midday, an older man approached from the house. He walked with a slight limp, but his bearing was dignified. "Papa," Valentina greeted him. "This is Hank Dawson, James's brother." The older man's eyes widened in recognition. "Dawson, yes, I remember." He extended a weathered hand. "Eduardo Juarez, your brother was a good man. He helped us when others would not." Hank shook his hand, curious. "What do you mean?" Eduardo gestured to the land around them. "When we came, many did not want Mexicans buying land here. There was resistance. Your brother stood with us. Said a man should be judged by his work, not where he was born." That sounded like James. Always the one to step between trouble and those who couldn't defend themselves. It had gotten him killed in the end. "I didn't know," Hank admitted. "Come," Eduardo said. "Eat with us, then we talk more." Lunch was simple but flavorful: beans, tortillas, and vegetables from their own garden. As they ate in the shade of the house's small porch, Eduardo shared stories of the early days in the valley, including memories of James that Hank had never heard. "Your brother believed in this place," Eduardo said. "He saw what it could be." "He always was the one with vision," Hank replied. "I was just the one who followed." "And after he died?" Valentina asked softly. Hank hesitated. He hadn't spoken of those days to anyone, but something about the quiet dignity of these people, their connection to James, loosened his tongue. "I did something I shouldn't have," he admitted. A man named Marcus Fletcher was responsible for the ambush that killed James. He was part of a gang that attacked the stagecoach James was guarding. Eduardo nodded. "I remember the silver shipment robbery." "I tracked Fletcher down," Hank continued, his voice flat. "Found him in a saloon 2 towns over. I called him out." He stared at his hands. "It wasn't a fair fight. He was drunk, could barely stand, let alone draw." "But you killed him anyway," Valentina stated, not a question. "I did." Hank met her gaze, expecting judgment. "Then I ran." His family owned half the county back then, had the law in their pocket. Instead of condemnation, Valentina's eyes held understanding. "Grief makes us do things we wouldn't otherwise." "The Fletchers are gone now," Eduardo added. "The silver ran out, and so did their fortune." "The son, the one who would have hunted you, he died in a mining accident 2 years ago." The news should have been a relief. The main reason for Hank's exile was gone, yet he felt nothing but a hollow ache. "Doesn't change what I did." "No," Eduardo agreed, "but it means you can stop running." After lunch, they returned to work. The afternoon passed quickly, and by sunset they had repaired a significant section of the irrigation system. As Hank prepared to leave, Valentina walked him to where Traveler was hitched. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked. "There's still more to be done." Hank hesitated. The smart thing would be to move on. He'd paid his respects to James. He'd learned the Fletchers were no longer a threat. There was nothing keeping him in Promise Valley. Except the way Valentina was looking at him, as if she could see past the years of drifting and the guilt he carried, to something underneath that he'd almost forgotten existed. "I'll be back," he said. 1 day turned into 3, then a week. The work on the farm gave Hank a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Each morning, he rode out from town, and each evening, he returned with the satisfaction of having built something rather than just survived another day. And then there was Valentina. They worked side by side, talking more freely as the days passed. He learned that she had studied at a mission school, that she could read both Spanish and English, that she had dreams of expanding the farm to grow crops no one thought possible in Arizona territory. "People say I'm stubborn," she told him one afternoon as they took a break in the shade of an apple tree she'd somehow coaxed to grow in the desert. "That I should be content with what we have. Are you? Hank asked. Content, she considered the question seriously. I'm grateful. For this land, for what we've built. She gestured toward the fields where new irrigation channels were bringing life to previously barren soil. But content, no, there's always more to do, more to learn, more to prove, Hank suggested, recognizing something of himself in her determination. Valentina smiled, a rare full smile that reached her eyes. Perhaps, to myself mostly. As the second week began, Hank moved his few possessions from the boarding house to a small cabin on the Juarez property. It was practical, Eduardo insisted. No sense riding back and forth each day when there was shelter right there. The cabin had been built for farm hands during harvest season, but stood empty the rest of the year. The first night in the cabin, Hank lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the crops, the soft murmur of voices from the main house where Valentina and her father were still awake. It was the longest he'd stayed in one place since leaving Promise Valley years ago. It should have made him restless. Instead, he felt something like peace. The next morning, Valentina found him by the new irrigation channel, testing the water flow. Papa and I were talking, she said without preamble. We want to offer you a proper position here, not just day labor but a partnership of sorts. You have skills we need and you understand the land. Hank straightened, surprised by the offer. I'm not a farmer, Val, neither was I once. She gestured to the thriving fields around them. We learn, we adapt. I'm not sure I'll be staying that long, Hank said, though the words lacked conviction. Valentina studied him, her green eyes serious. What is it you're looking for, Hank Dawson? All these years of wandering, what were you hoping to find? The question hit him like a physical blow. What had he been looking for? Absolution, peace, or just the next place to hide from his past? I don't know anymore, he admitted. At first I was just running, then it became a habit. Easier to keep moving than to stop and face. He gestured vaguely. Your ghosts, Valentina finished for him. Something like that. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. And have you faced them now, your brother's grave, the man you killed? Are they at rest? I'm not sure ghosts ever rest, Hank said softly, but maybe they get quieter. Then perhaps it's time to start listening to something else. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but steady. Think about our offer, we don't need an answer today. That evening, Eduardo invited Hank to join them for dinner in the main house. The meal was richer than their usual midday fare, a stew made with vegetables from their garden and meat from a neighbor's ranch, fresh bread, and a bottle of Spanish wine that Eduardo had been saving for a special occasion. To new beginnings, Eduardo toasted, raising his glass. And to old memories honored. As they ate, Eduardo shared stories of his life in Mexico, of meeting his wife, of their journey north after political troubles made staying too dangerous. He spoke of the early days in Promise Valley, the struggle to prove that the dry land could be farmed with the right techniques. Many said it could not be done, Eduardo said, that we were fools to try. But you proved them wrong, Hank observed, looking around at the comfortable home they'd built. We are still proving, Valentina corrected. Every season brings new challenges, drought, floods, pests, she smiled. Doubters. After dinner, Eduardo retired early, leaving Hank and Valentina sitting on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. Your father is a remarkable man, Hank said. He is, Valentina agreed. He taught me that the past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. She turned to look at Hank directly. What would you do if you stayed? The question caught him off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead. Think now, she encouraged. What would Hank Dawson do if he weren't running anymore? Hank considered the question seriously. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to think beyond the next town, the next job, the next day. I'd build something, he said finally. Something that lasts. Like you and your father have done here. Valentina's smile was soft in the moonlight. Then I hope you stay. She rose to go inside, but paused at the door. Good night, Hank. Good night, Val. He sat there long after she'd gone, watching the stars and thinking about roots and ghosts, and the possibility of a future he'd never dared imagine. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Hank was repairing a fence when he heard the sound of approaching horses, 3 riders moving fast. He instinctively checked for his pistol before remembering he'd stopped wearing it while working on the farm. Valentina emerged from the fields, wiping her hands on her apron as the riders approached. "Can I help you?" she called, her posture wary but not hostile. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, reined his horse to a stop. "Miss Juarez," he nodded, "we're looking for a man named Hank Dawson. Word is he's been working here." Hank stepped forward before Valentina could respond. "I'm Dawson." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Thought you might be, got a telegram from over Prescott Way, says you're wanted for questioning about a shooting 3 years back." "Fletcher," Hank said, resignation settling in his gut. "Thought that was over and done." "Not quite," the sheriff replied. "Fletcher's widow never gave up. She's been hounding every lawman from here to California, finally found a judge willing to listen." Valentina moved to stand beside Hank. "What exactly is he accused of?" "Murder," the sheriff said bluntly. "Of Marcus Fletcher, shot him in a saloon in '75. "It wasn't murder," Hank said evenly. "It was a fair fight," one of the deputies snorted. "That's not how the widow tells it, says you gunned down an unarmed man." "That's not true," Hank began, but Valentina cut him off. "Sheriff, Mr. Dawson has been working for us for nearly 2 weeks. He's been a valuable asset to our farm. Surely whatever happened 3 years ago can be addressed without taking him away immediately." The sheriff hesitated, clearly respecting Valentina's position in the community. "Miss Juarez, I understand your concern, but the law is the law. Mr. Dawson needs to come with us to answer these charges." "Then I'll come willingly," Hank said, meeting the sheriff's gaze steadily. "No need for trouble." "Hank, no," Valentina protested. "It's all right, Val." He turned to her. "I told you I did something I shouldn't have. Maybe it's time I faced that properly." The ride to town was tense but uneventful. The sheriff, a man named Harris who'd been appointed after Hank left the valley, seemed inclined to hear him out. "The Fletcher woman's got money and influence," Harris explained as they approached the town. "But folks around here remember her husband differently than she does. He wasn't exactly beloved." "Doesn't change what I did," Hank said. "No, but it might change how a jury sees it." Harris gave him a sidelong look. "Especially with the Juarez family vouching for you, they're respected despite." "Well, you know how some folks are about Mexicans." Hank did know. It was one of the things that had made him respect James, all the more his willingness to stand up for the Juarez family when they first arrived. The town jail was small but clean. Harris put him in a cell but didn't lock it. "Stay put," the sheriff advised. "I'm sending a telegram to clarify some things. No sense rushing off to Prescott if we don't have to." Left alone, Hank sat on the narrow cot, thoughts racing. He'd known this day might come, had prepared himself for it during those first years on the run. What he hadn't prepared for was the sense of loss he felt now, not just for his freedom, but for the future he'd just begun to envision at the Juarez farm with Valentina. Hours passed. Hank dozed fitfully, waking to the sound of voices in the outer office. The door opened to reveal Sheriff Harris and, to Hank's surprise, Eduardo Juarez. "Mr. Dawson," Eduardo said formally, "I have come to speak on your behalf." Harris looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Juarez believes there are extenuating circumstances regarding Fletcher's death." "Something about your brother," Eduardo nodded. "James Dawson was killed protecting a silver shipment. Fletcher was part of the gang that ambushed the stagecoach. This is known fact." "That doesn't justify vigilante justice," Harris pointed out. "No," Eduardo agreed, "but it explains it." "And there is more." He turned to Hank. "Tell him what you told me about the confrontation." Hank took a deep breath. "I called Fletcher out, I won't deny that, but he drew first. He was drunk, yes, but he was armed and he drew. I was faster, that's all." "Were there witnesses?" Harris asked. "A saloon full," Hank confirmed. "But who'd speak against the Fletchers back then?" Harris considered this. "Mrs. Fletcher's complaint specifically states you shot an unarmed man in cold blood." "That's a lie," Hank said firmly. "I've done things I'm not proud of, but I've never shot an unarmed man." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I believe you, and I think a judge might too, especially if we can find any of those witnesses now." "So what happens next?" Eduardo asked. "I send another telegram, we wait." Harris shrugged. And in the meantime, Mr. Dawson stays here but comfortable like. He gestured to the open cell. Consider yourself in protective custody, not under arrest. It was a better outcome than Hank had expected, but still, the prospect of a trial, of having to relive those dark days after James's death, filled him with dread. Eduardo seemed to read his thoughts. Courage, my friend, the truth will stand, will it? Hank asked after Harris had left them alone. The truth is I killed a man who might not have deserved dying, even if he did draw first. Eduardo was silent for a moment. When we came to this valley, there were those who said we did not belong. That our kind should stay on the other side of the border. Your brother stood with us when others would not. James was always braver than me, Hank said. No, Eduardo corrected gently. Different perhaps, he stood publicly, you fought your battles alone, but now you do not have to. As if to emphasize his point, the door opened again and Valentina entered, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. I brought food, she said, setting the basket on the small table. Real food, not whatever slop they serve in jails. Despite everything, Hank found himself smiling. Thank you. Eduardo tactfully excused himself, mentioning farm business that needed attention. As the door closed behind him, Valentina turned to Hank, her expression fierce. This is wrong, she said. You should not be in here. It's all right, Hank assured her. Harris is being fair. And your father has already made a strong case for me. Papa has always been good with words. She began unpacking the basket bread still warm from the oven, cold meat, fresh vegetables, a jar of cider, but I prefer action. Hank raised an eyebrow. What kind of action? I've already sent telegrams to every town between here and Prescott, asking for anyone who witnessed the confrontation with Fletcher. She handed him a plate. And I've written to a lawyer in Tucson who has helped us in the past. He will be here tomorrow. Hank was stunned by her efficiency. Val, you didn't have to do all that. Yes, I did. She met his gaze directly. Because you matter to me, Hank Dawson, more than I expected, and certainly more than is wise. The simple declaration hit him with more force than any physical blow. In the weeks they'd worked together, something had grown between them, a connection, a understanding, a possibility. But neither had put it into words until now. You matter to me too, he said softly. More than anything has in a very long time. She smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Good, then we understand each other. She sat across from him at the small table. Now eat, we have a long fight ahead and you'll need your strength. The next few days passed in a blur of legal discussions and telegrams. The lawyer Valentina had summoned, a sharp-minded man named Reeves, was cautiously optimistic. Mrs. Fletcher's story has inconsistencies, he explained during one of their meetings in the sheriff's office. And we've located 2 witnesses who confirm Mr. Dawson's account. Fletcher was armed and drew first, despite being intoxicated. Will that be enough? Valentina asked. It should be, especially given the circumstances of James Dawson's death and Fletcher's known association with the gang responsible. Reeves shuffled his papers. The judge in Prescott has agreed to hear the case here, rather than requiring Mr. Dawson to be transported. He'll arrive by stage the day after tomorrow. True to the lawyer's word, Judge Wilson arrived on the afternoon stage 2 days later. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. The hearing was set for the following morning in the town hall. That night, Valentina visited Hank in his cell, bringing supper as she had each evening. Everything is prepared, she assured him. Reeves is confident. And if he's wrong? Hank asked, Valentina's jaw set in a determined line. Then we appeal, we fight, however long it takes. Val, Hank said gently, reaching through the bars to take her hand. If this goes wrong, I don't want you spending your life fighting a battle that can't be won. That is not for you to decide, she replied, squeezing his hand. But it won't come to that. I believe in the truth, Hank, and I believe in you. Her faith humbled him. It had been so long since anyone had believed in him, perhaps since James. And here was this remarkable woman, standing by him without hesitation. When this is over, he said, whatever happens, I want you to know these weeks at your farm have been the best I've had in years. You and your father showed me what it means to build something worthwhile. Valentina's eyes softened. It's not over yet, Hank Dawson, and I expect many more weeks, years of you helping us build something worthwhile. The hearing the next morning was surprisingly brief. Judge Wilson listened carefully to both sides, the prosecutor presenting Mrs. Fletcher's claims and Reeves defending Hank with testimony from the witnesses they'd located. When all evidence had been presented, the judge removed his spectacles and addressed the room. The law exists to protect the innocent and punish the guilty, he began. But it must be applied with an understanding of context and circumstance. Mr. Dawson confronted the man he believed responsible for his brother's death. That confrontation ended in Marcus Fletcher's death. This is not disputed. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Hank. However, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Fletcher was armed and drew his weapon first, despite being intoxicated. Mr. Dawson defended himself, as is his right under the law. Furthermore, the significant delay in bringing these charges and the inconsistencies in Mrs. Fletcher's account suggest motivations beyond justice. The judge replaced his spectacles. It is the finding of this court that Hank Dawson acted in self-defense during a legally sanctioned confrontation. The charges are dismissed. The relief that swept through Hank was so intense he nearly staggered. Valentina, seated just behind him, let out a small cry of joy. Eduardo, beside her, simply nodded as if he'd never doubted the outcome. Outside the town hall in the bright Arizona sunshine, Valentina threw her arms around Hank, propriety be damned. "It's over," she whispered. "You're free." Hank held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, sunshine, and herbs from the garden. "Thanks to you." Eduardo approached, extending his hand. "Congratulations, my friend, justice has been served." "What happens now?" Valentina asked, stepping back but keeping her hand in Hank's. Hank looked at the two of them, this family that had welcomed him, defended him, believed in him. For the first time in years, the path forward seemed clear. "Now," he said, "if you'll still have me, I'd like to accept that partnership we discussed, help build something that lasts." Eduardo's smile was warm. "The offer stands. Our farm can use a man like you. And what about our farm?" Valentina asked softly, her meaning clear in her eyes. Hank's heart swelled with an emotion he'd almost forgotten. "Hope. I think that might need more discussion," he said, squeezing her hand. "Preferably over a long period of time." She smiled, understanding in her eyes. "We have time now." 3 years later, the Juarez-Dawson farm was the talk of the territory. The irrigation system, expanded and improved with Hank's help, had transformed the once barren land into a flourishing enterprise. Crops that no one believed could grow in Arizona soil thrived under their care. The small cabin where Hank had first stayed had been replaced by a larger house, built with his own hands, where he and Valentina now lived as husband and wife. Eduardo had his own rooms attached, though he spent most days working alongside them in the fields or with their latest project, an experimental orchard. On a warm spring evening, Hank stood on the porch of their home, watching as Valentina walked among the newly planted fruit trees. Her body had changed in recent months, rounding with the child they expected by summer's end. In her arms, she carried their firstborn, a daughter named Alina who had just celebrated her first birthday. As Valentina approached, Alina reached out for her father. Hank took her, settling the little girl on his hip. "She wanted to see the new trees," Valentina explained, smiling at the way their daughter patted Hank's cheek, just like her father, already thinking about what will grow. Hank looked out over their land, the fields green with new crops, the orchard that would take years to mature, the irrigation channels carrying life, giving water where it was needed. All of it built with patience, determination, and hope. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted, not for the first time. "A home, a family, a future." Valentina leaned against him, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "That's the thing about seeds, Hank. They can lie dormant for years, waiting for the right conditions. But given water, sunlight, and good soil, they'll grow into something beautiful." "Is that what happened to me?" he asked, smiling down at her. "You planted me in good soil." "No," she corrected, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "I just helped you see that you already had roots. You just needed somewhere to plant them." As the sun set over Promise Valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Hank Dawson stood with his family, rooted in the present, growing toward the future, the ghosts of his past finally at rest in the fertile soil of home.